This is Dan Schneider on this Dan Schneider video interview. It is another of my Actors on Acting interviews. I'm speaking with Bill Applebaum. He is an actor who's best known for the Actors Improv Studio. He's also worked with Second City, and the conversation will begin in a moment. Bill Applebaum is the man before you. Many of you may have seen him in a commercial or may have seen him on television or a film role, but may not know the name. He runs, he started an organization called the Actors Improv Studio, where he has spent a lot of time, I guess, teaching people the art of acting and improvisation. So welcome, Bill. As I like to usually do, if you could take a few minutes, give a little bit of a background about yourself as a person and an actor, where you came from, how you got into the arts and acting.
Thanks, Dan. It's nice to be here with you. I don't come from an artistic background as such. My aunt was a dancer, but that didn't have much influence on me. Acting was something that I was always interested in, and did as a young person, and continued doing it in junior high and high school. Did my first professional acting job in high school, and always had a flair for sort of making things up. And at the time, my brother suggested, after I graduated from university with a BFA, he thought that Second City might be a good place for me to go, try to work at. And he lived in Toronto. There was Second City in Toronto, and there was one in Chicago. So I moved to Chicago with the idea that I would somehow get involved in Second City. And I did. Improvised with them. I worked on stage for about 5 years, worked at many other theaters in Chicago, and moved out to Los Angeles, did more improvisation, acting, a lot of writing, a lot of commercial work, things like that out in Los Angeles. And about 20 years ago, founded the Actors Improv Studio as a place for people to learn the art of improvisation. What we teach at Actors Improv Studios, improvisation as a creative tool to help people trust their instincts. Improvisation has gotten really a sort of a broad known commodity in the last 10 or 15 years, but a lot of people don't quite understand what I think improvisation is all about anyway, the way I learned it at Second City, which was that Sorry?
I didn't say anything. Go ahead.
Oh, that improvisation is not about being clever, but it's about being creative. And it helps people to trust their instincts, and that's what we teach at the Actors Improv Studio.
Now, just for people who may not know, as we record this in the year 2016, could you explain what Second City is or was?
Sure.
Because most people, who even kids today, who may be millennials, may vaguely be aware of Second City Television, the old Canadian television show. But if you could explain what Second City as a whole was, what is?
Second City Theater is a theater that started in Chicago in 1959, and it was a place where they took Viola Spolin's theater games, improvisation games, and created a theater, an art form of improvisation. And it's still in existence some 55 years later. And it's a great training ground for a lot of people to learn how to improvise. A lot of people who went to SNL came from there. People that you would probably recognize, like Steve Carell, Colbert, Tina Fey, people like that, all trained at Second City.
Now, you mentioned Saturday Night Live, SNL, and I had mentioned Second City Television. And you mentioned Toronto, because most of the Second City Television crew came from Canada, were Canadians. Is there any difference between the American and the Canadian Second Cities?
Second City? Only the location. The idea was all the same in terms of how to improvise, the way the shows were created, which was through improvisation, improvising scenes over and over again until you felt that they were as good as they can get. And then once the scenes were improvised, then they were written down into script form. And then a show was created out of the scenes that had been improvised for the next show.
And Second City is usually associated with comedy. Is that a misperception? Is it also dramatic improvisation?
Well, the emphasis in Second City is always one on where was the irony. And when you do that, it's going to be comedic by its nature. But improvisation, as far as I'm concerned, is acting at its core essence. And so whether it's comedic or dramatic, it doesn't matter, because it's really about listening, staying in the moment, staying moment to moment, and then responding. So the elements that certainly we teach at Actors Improv Studio are applicable for both drama and comedy.
Well, as for improvisation, most people have, I would guess, the misperception that actors have often talked to me about, that it's basically just two people standing up there yanking each other's cranks, trying to just throw stuff at us, like that old ad-lib show that Drew Carey hosted some years ago, and I think it's still on the CW or one of those minor channels. But in reality, it's more as John Cassavetes, the director, would have his people in that you'd rehearse, and maybe after the 41st or the 73rd rehearsal, you come up with an idea that then gets incorporated. So it isn't spontaneous off the cuff. It's a lot of rehearsal, and more so the actors taking what's on the page and twisting it one way or the other. Is that correct?
I think that's an accurate assessment. A lot of people think that improvisation are people making things up in a void, trying to think of things that are funny to say. But that's not what improvisational actors are doing. There's always a context within which you're improvising. And the context, whether or not that's the relationship or the point of view that you have, or if it's scripted, what's the context of the script? Or if you're improvising commercials, what is the context of that commercial? So there's always a context in which we improvise. And improvisers are not thinking of funny things to say. They're just thinking of responding to what's happening each moment to moment to moment. And it's really about making the discovery together with your scene partner and with the audience of what is going on between the 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 people, however many are improvising in that particular scene.
And I would think that doing stage theater is the ideal pot, or if you will, for improvisation, because if you're doing something dozens or hundreds of times over the course of an 8 or 10 or 26-week run, there are going to be times when you come to a familiar scene or a moment and the other actor somehow flubs a line or maybe accidentally trips on the stage, and you have to sort of incorporate that into the moment, especially if it's like, say, a serious drama. And you can make an offhanded remark, and that can either be a moment that people will remember in a positive sense or in a negative sense, depending on how well the flub or whatever is improvised about.
Yeah, that's true. And within the context of stage work, any kind of scripted work, especially if you're running in a play and you've got an 8, 10, 12-month run or something, each night you want to make it as fresh as possible. And one of the ways to do that, again, within the confines of what's already been directed, you can improvise something to make it fresh for you. That doesn't mean changing the direction or what the director has imposed on the show, but it's how you and the character respond in that moment at any given time within, again, the parameters or the context of what it was you're allowed to do. And that's one of the ways that people keep things fresh.
Yeah.
Improvising within a script, within scripted materials, allows one to rehearse, and then perhaps something will occur to you as that character, and you'll say it differently than you had before, or you'll take an action differently than you had before. That's also improvising within the script. Improvisation is not just about making up things to say.
Yeah. You had mentioned something, an improvised commercial. I'd never heard or even thought that a commercial, which is usually only 30 seconds or so, at least here in America, a 30-second little thing. Have you done commercials that are improvised? Was it like some model comes out wearing some lipstick and you're the guy who looks at her and supposed to smile, and the director said, no, that's not working. We're going to have her do something and you're going to react in a different way? Is that, give me an example
Well,
of
a
an
lot of
improvised
times,
commercial.
it's not. SAG has created a rule that says you cannot actually improvise in an audition for a commercial anymore, because people used to improvise in the audition, and then what they improvised would end up in the commercial, but not the people.
And then they didn't get that, and then that person didn't get the proper remuneration for that.
That's correct. That's correct. So now, for commercial auditions, they'll say make it your own or have fun with it, which is code for improvise. And what casting people talk about all the time is they want people who have trained in improvisation, not for big boffo characters as such, but for people who trust their instincts and their creative intuition, and see how improvisation allows for each particular actor to do what they want to do with the audition. So you may not actually improvise fully in the commercial, although depending on the director and the client, there is leeway within a commercial where you actually, in the olden days, you used to be able to have a lot more leeway in terms of improvising the dialogue. But usually they're fairly strict about that, but not for the audition process. That's where a lot of creativity comes into in terms of improvising.
Looking up, you've done, it says quite a few commercials. When you've done a commercial, is as an actor or just as yourself, from your own point of view, do you take that role as seriously as you do, say, if you were a guest villain on some television show? Or is it just like that you pop in for a day or two, work maybe 8 or 10 hours, and then go home and hopefully become, like the old Nancy Walker character, the bounty towels, that you become some iconic spokesman and make a lot of money? How serious is it? Do you view it as sort of an art form in miniature, or is it just hawking the product?
It's all acting, whether it's commercial on-camera acting, whether it's voiceover acting, whether it's television acting, stage acting, film acting. To an actor, to me anyway, it's all acting. If you're certainly one could makes good money doing commercials and doing television and film, but that's not the essence of what you're doing. It'd be great if you could become a spokesperson, because there is a lot of money involved with that. But you need to take it all seriously, because somebody else could get that job if you're not going to do your job as an actor and take it seriously.
Now, you talked about voiceover, and quite a number of actors, and a lot of especially actors who were child actors or who had hit shows years ago, you see they become voice actors for cartoons. But I've actually spoken to a couple of actors who say that the growing area for voiceover work is in video games, and that video games have a different structure of remuneration, different than films, in that they pay more upfront, and you don't get residuals. Whereas if you're doing voiceover for the latest DreamWorks or Disney project, you may not make as much upfront, but you get a certain percentage of video sales and whatnot. Have you done that as well, the video game stuff?
I haven't done any video games. It's a very specific niche market, but there's certainly a lot of work for that, especially in Los Angeles. Although people are able to work anywhere these days just by having their own home studio. But yeah, the way payment is all set up is all different based on whatever format you're using. But it's all acting at its fundamental.
You use the term just then, home studio. What do you mean by a home studio? Do you have cameras and set up that you send out demo reels?
Cameras work, but for voiceover acting.
Oh,
A
okay.
lot of people it's very easy. The equipment's really good. It's very easy to make it soundproof. I was talking yesterday to a friend of mine who does a lot of voiceover stuff, and he's been using his iPhone to record and send, and he keeps telling his agent, let me know if it's no good, let me know if it's no good. And they haven't complained yet, and he's still booking, so it doesn't require very much these days in terms of equipment.
Well, let us talk a bit about stage work, because you said you thought improv was sort of the essence of acting, and I similarly felt, that stage is the oldest form of acting. Obviously, the Greeks didn't have film or television. Talk to me about the differences between working on a character on stage, where you're playing the same character. It may be a character that you're going to play 200 times doing the exact same thing, versus, let's say, you're going in for a one-shot guest role as either a victim or a villain or the boyfriend of the lead character or something. Is stage work more fulfilling because it is the same character and you get to every night do this or that one way or the other way, that you're constantly tweaking? It's sort of like cooking spaghetti and meatballs every night. You have to make it a little bit different.
For me, stage work is somewhat more fulfilling because there's an immediate reaction with the audience.
Uh-huh.
And as you say, every night it makes it a little different, and every night you get to adjust a bit here or there. Stage work also gives the luxury of having a long rehearsal period that you normally don't get, certainly with television. So it allows one to grow into the character and discover more nuanced issues that the character may have over the course of time. Television is just a condensed version of stage work. You just have to get to it a lot quicker.
Yeah. Now, when you're doing multiple stage, or rather the same character over and over again, do you tend to find that the role goes in cycles, i.e., that maybe you're better on Tuesday and Wednesday performances than you are on weekend performances? Do you have is it sort of like breathing, that somehow you get into rhythm, or maybe you hit 10 home runs 10 straight nights, and then you have around 2 or 3 performances that are subpar? And how do you account for that? Do you say to yourself, well, it's like a professional athlete, you can't hit 4 home runs every game,
Well, yeah, that's a good question. I mean, certainly your job as an actor is to make it fresh every night, and to make sure the audience goes away as satisfied as you can have them. Personally, you may feel a little bit off here or there, because it is difficult to maintain a certain level each night, but that's your job, and you have to do your best to do that, and certainly not to give a performance where the audience will walk away and saying, well, that actor was phoning it in.
Yeah.
Whether or not, if you're working on stage and that's where you're doing, you just have to remind yourself each night why you're doing this, where you're there. It's the first time the audience is seeing it. You want to give them the best shot that you can. When we were at Second City and we would do the shows and we would improvise, there were nights when our improvisation wasn't going as well as we thought, and we used to blame the audience. Well, the audience isn't into it, or they're not a very good audience. And the director would come back and say, if we were to behave that way, he'd say, no, it's your problem. If you're not getting it across to the audience, it's not the audience's fault. It's your fault. It was a pretty good lesson to learn.
Now, acting is a performing art like singing or dancing, and I'm a writer. I've known plenty of painters. I've known people who are on sort of what is traditionally thought as the creative side, rather than those performing arts, which are generally thought of as interpretive arts. Do you think that there is an element of creation within acting or the other performing arts, or is it minor, and is interpreting something that the writer has put out there, whatever character you're playing? Is your job more or less to to infuse what is already there, or do you feel that it's sort of the lump of clay and you are bringing life to the golem of the words?
Well, acting is a collaborative effort between the writer, the actor, the director. The writer has a vision, he puts it down on paper, the director is interpreting that vision, the actor is also interpreting that vision, and hopefully, ideally, collectively, you come up with something that everyone is happy with. Sometimes a writer will write something and not hear it in the same way that an actor hears it, and will make that discovery and say, oh, that's fantastic, I never thought of that before. So it's all part of the creative process, and everyone's involved with that ideally.
How often have you come across a character, let's say on stage, let's keep it to stage for now, that, or let's say it's a new play. Let's say you're not doing some Clifford Odets or Arthur Miller play from yore, but let's say it's a new play that has yet to debut, and you're playing with a character, and you're going through the rehearsal process, and have you ever come upon a time where you or the director, or if the writer is there too, say it's just not working because of A, B, or C, and what is the process of bringing that up? Are most of the writers, especially if they're new and this is their first production, are they open to it? Does the director often see some of the things that the actors do, or is it usually people coming from 3 different viewpoints and never getting together?
Well, having a good dramaturg always helps if things aren't going well.
And what is the difference between a dramaturg and a director then?
What's the difference?
Yeah, just so people know.
A dramaturg is one who actually focuses on sort of the whole play and the words and helps to facilitate. The director is the one who takes it and says, this is what this is how I'm interpreting the play.
Yeah.
And the director will then direct the actors into his vision of that.
Okay.
It depends on the writer. Some writers are very open to the process, particularly if they're new. In terms of the collaboration, if things aren't working, everyone wants to make it better. So people are mostly open to looking to find ways to make it better, whether it's changing the words, whether it's reimagining what's happening at that particular moment, or what have you.
Now, I spoke with another actor who told me that one of the things that she kind of enjoys is when she's paired with someone who's not quite up to snuff, maybe not a terrible actor, but not the best actor, because it forces her to be at the top of her game. When you have encountered or been on stage with someone, whether maybe they're forgetting their lines, every 10th line or something, or whether they may know the lines, but they're just robotic on stage, how do you as the actor handle that? Do you try to somehow coax something out of them after a bad performance? Do you go to the director and say, he or she is just killing us with the performance? Or do you just say, well, I just come here, I collect the paycheck, the director has to deal with their inadequacies?
Well, the director knows if things aren't working well, usually, and they'll say something, or the stage manager once the show opens. As an improviser, and as an actor, but as an improviser especially, your job is to make the other person look good. And if you make them look good, then you look good. One of the things we do at Actors Improv Studio is we don't have classes that have levels. And the reason we don't do that is our feeling is that people who are more experienced learn as much from people who are less experienced as people who are less experienced learn from people who are more experienced. And one has to adjust that. And in the real world, you're always working with people who have less experience than you, or people who have more experience than you. So that's part of the impetus in terms of Actors Improv Studio, to have mixed level classes. So you're constantly learning and adjust how to work with people who have varying levels of experience.
Well, since you brought it up, can you give me an example in both directions where a less experienced actor somehow benefited a more experienced actor, and vice versa at Actors Improv or anywhere else where you've performed?
Well, a less experienced actor will be able to pick up quickly, hopefully, to see how to respond to things from somebody who's more experienced, to watch them and see how quickly they respond, or how the more experienced person responds in any given circumstance. And the more experienced actor dealing with a less experienced actor does have to be on the top of their game so that they can respond when the less experienced actor maybe freezes or isn't sure what to say or do.
I know that a term that's often used in acting, and a few times in these interviews I've done, people have used it, is that some actors are generous and others are not generous. And I don't think that they mean, for example, that someone is just a glory hound or a ham on stage, the way, say, Marlon Brando is accused of being on a lot of his film sets, but that some actors are willing to go, more above and beyond what they need to do, either in the midst of a performance or leading up to a performance, and other actors aren't. When you've acted with people, is it generally, do most actors prefer the more generous type actor, or is it just that, if this person is a self-centered son of a bitch, but when they get on stage, they're razor sharp? Is it just all that's on stage that matters because that's all the audience will see? And is there some kind of, say, conflict between what goes on backstage and what's actually presented to an audience?
Well, ultimately, yes, all that matters is what's presented on stage. Whether you get along with your fellow actors or not off stage is kind of irrelevant. It certainly makes for a nicer set, be it in television or on stage. Certainly nicer if everyone gets along and is working well together and you get out on stage. It, I think, may add a certain excitement to working with those people. But ultimately, it's your job. So if you can't stand somebody who you're working with, you have to leave that backstage and get on stage and act as if whatever the characters are doing is all that matters at that moment. And that is ultimately all that does matter.
Yeah. Now let's talk a little bit more. Let's just back off from acting, because we talked the first 20-some minutes here on acting, more focused. But let's talk a little back up and get a little bit more sociological. What do you think right now is the state of American theater, both at the local level, the sort of dinner theater level, the small theater level, in Boise, Idaho, or in the middle of nowhere, Iowa? And what is it like in the bigger cities, the Chicagos, the Bostons, the LA, the New York, whether it's off Broadway or on Broadway? Do you think that American theater is in a good place, or has it been like most of that we think of Disney as, or Broadway, become Disneyfied?
Well, I can't speak to smaller towns in terms of what's happening there because I don't know. I think the American theater is in a good place. There's lots of shows, things happening well on Broadway. Chicago's got a great theater scene. Los Angeles, the theater scene is really tremendous. I think it's in good shape. There's people who are still playwriting, coming up with new playwrights, and there's a lot more festivals, fringe festivals in Los Angeles, small groups where individuals get to perform. So I think it's pretty healthy.
Let's talk then about commercial work, because I know I've spoken to some actors about who've been in the business 30, 40 or more years, and you had mentioned too some changes in the business. Well, before I get to commercial work, when we're talking about stage or film or theater or commercial work, has there been one overriding trend in all of those forms of acting, probably dictated by business needs, that you've noticed that actors had to deal with that they didn't have to deal with, say, in the 70s or 80s?
One thing that they have to deal with that is new, that they didn't have to deal with? Well, there's a changing landscape in terms of content. I think for the positive, through online and cameras on phones and all of that, people have I think, a much easier time of creating their own content, and I think that's been a real positive.
A couple of months ago, I think it might have been Helen Mirren, some famous actress had bemoaned that a lot of what goes on, let's say in Hollywood, both on the network level in television and on the studio level for films, that certainly most film nowadays is geared towards younger people. All the superhero stuff, every little rom-com. Uh, do you think that the social media, the Facebooks, the Twitters, the Instagrams, and whatnot, uh, has sort of skewed the view of what acting is? Because this actress, and I think it was Helen Mirren, had bemoaned working with actors she claimed were incompetent, but who were cast merely because they had X amount of followers on whatever social media outlet, rather than the fundamental skills of an actor being able to realistically act the scene. And I had one other actor just recently tell me that literally they were on a set of a movie, and right before the cameras rolled, some of the younger actors they were working with were texting, and then, oh, it's 10, 9, 8, and they put the phone away at like 3, rather than actually studying to be a craftsman or an artist.
Yeah, well, I think that's certainly true, and easier to have happen these days, especially if you haven't trained in the theater, because you can't get away with that training in the theater. So if you come to it through your YouTube channel or Instagram or something like that, you're not going to understand or know the requirements of professionalism. That's certainly true. But people have there has always been a certain number of people who've gotten jobs because of the way they look, or not necessarily because of talent or who they know.
Yeah.
Maybe Helen Mirren was talking about what's perceived more of that happening now than in the past. I can't speak directly to what she was saying.
Yeah, I know that also there was sort of a Twitter shitstorm about, I think it was, what's her name? Charlize Theron had claimed that she had been denied more substantive roles because she was too beautiful. And then the actress who had been the young girl in a film called Welcome to the Dollhouse about 20 years was like, boo hoo hoo. And it seemed a kind of a silly thing because, as you say, and I mentioned this dealing with black actors. Almost every black actor on his resume has Othello. And it's like, aren't there any other roles that black actors can do other than Othello to get their bona fides? And, women, it seems, if they're doing theater at least, have you done Lady Macbeth? And do you think, for example, you talked about American theater being healthy. Has it opened up in the last 30 or 40 years that you're getting more minority roles or minority-based theater, or more roles with substantive female roles that aren't just tokenism?
Well, it certainly appears to be that, but I don't know if I were female or if I were a minority, if I would feel the same. There's a constant battle of progress to opening up all roles to all people, and all we can do is continue to fight that battle and make sure that everyone has an opportunity to play whatever roles are available.
Let's talk about some of your stage work. Can you tell me what was maybe the most difficult role that you had to essay, whether it was from the standpoint of maybe you were playing a killer, or that just the production or the lighting or the way that it was presented on stage gave you hurdles? And how did you overcome that as an actor? Did you do it by your own adjustments, or was it a group effort?
Well, I think the most difficult things that we did on stage was when I was touring with Second City, because we tour all over the country, and each venue was very different. Some were pretty awful. The great thing about that was the training that we got in how, as an ensemble, how to make it work no matter what the circumstances are. Once you have to work on a 4x6 platform in a bar with a lot of people drinking and yelling at you, and you figure out how to win them over, you can pretty much work anywhere. And that's the other thing about improvisation at its essence, again, is how to work with the group. It's ensemble work. It's not supposed to be about trying to outdo or out-funny the other person. So for me, those days were the ones that that were the most difficult, but in retrospect, the most rewarding, and the things that sort of prepared me for any circumstance that would present itself.
To what degree do you separate yourself as a human being from an artist or an actor? I.e., have you ever gotten approached for roles in any medium that you said, I don't want to do that? I spoke with one fellow who said he doesn't want to ever play a pedophile, and other people, may have religious objections to this or that. Are there roles that you have turned down, for example? Have you ever had a role offered to you that, for one reason or another, other than maybe thinking that you weren't right for it because it was for whatever reason?
No, I've not gone on certain interviews or auditions because after reading the script, the character didn't connect with me, or I didn't find the script to be particularly compelling.
But it wasn't like you. It wasn't like you playing a neo-Nazi or a serial killer. It was just simply a poorly written character.
Yeah. I think the challenge for any artist is to find the humanity in any character, to make them fully dimensional as opposed to one-dimensional. And if you're an actor, you should always be striving to push yourself to redefine what you are and what you can do as an artist or an actor.
And what criteria do you use? You mentioned a role or two. Can you talk about, without getting specific, talk about a role that you turned down, and what was it about the character? Was the character just too broad, too slapstick? Was the character just not sympathetic, or was the character doing things that just didn't seem to organically flow from the situation?
Mostly the things I won't go on are things that I think, for me anyway, the characters are too broad, or the writing doesn't flow very well. And so where the idea might be really good, the play itself, I don't find it particularly compelling. But that's, somebody else obviously did it for whatever reasons, but that's just a personal choice.
Now, have most of your stage roles been in comedy or drama, and do you prefer one or the other?
Mostly comedic. Do I prefer one over the other? I certainly like doing the comedy. I like hearing the laughs, getting people to respond. Again, it sort of depends on the character and the play and the role itself.
Acting is basically taking moments that are ostensibly personal, and certainly usually personal to the character at large, and then sort of flipping open the envelope of their soul and exposing it to, the audience. Is there a specific way that you find to do that? I.e., some actors, and I'll give you an example that I saw a documentary on Akira Kurosawa talking about some of his actors, said one of the best ways for his characters or his actors to find their characters maybe to give that character a certain tick or a certain foible that recurs throughout the performance. Is that a way that maybe you might find into a character? Let's say if the character is a veteran or something, maybe to have the character just look over their shoulder in a paranoid manner or something to suggest PTSD. How do you open up the privacy, the inner workings of a fictional character into something that everyone can relate to?
Well, you have to sort of lay out the groundwork in terms of what's gone on in this person's life and how do I relate to that myself, and what, from my perspective, do I bring to this role will help me to interpret and infuse that character with the life that I bring to it. Some people, it's easy to work from the outside in, to take a tic or to some physical affectation to create that. Others like to work from the inside out. It really is depending on the individual and the particular character that you're playing. In comedy, I think the difficulty is to bring an element of truth to the character so that you're not playing a caricature. Not to say that there aren't, slapstick is very broad, but the more truthful you can make that slapstick character, the funnier it will be.
Yeah. Getting back to, I guess, doing comedy on stage, one of the best comedic writers of all time was Oscar Wilde. And when you read his plays, and to me, I always judge the plays by the words, and then I can sometimes see good performances from mediocre plays and vice versa. But I think that sometimes the best acting and the best moments in a drama aren't necessarily the high points or the expected high points, but the revelation of character in sort of the bridging moments. Do you find as an actor that sometimes that's the most challenging? And is that often where you think that some actors sort of let down and their performances, which in the high point moments, it might be spot on, they sometimes just sort of exhale too much and don't concern themselves with the bridging moments?
Sometimes that's certainly a problem, where actors are too hyper aware of themselves or their performance, if that's what you mean. I'm not sure I follow what you're asking there.
Well, basically, I know that when you submit like a demo reel or a highlight reel for an Oscar or for an Emmy, you often get someone's in a coma and they're speaking to their relative, or the character they're playing is speaking to the comatose person, or someone has just been raped and they're screaming, and it's these sort of melodramatic moments that always get the buzz. But the best acting is sometimes more limited. One of the people I spoke to just a couple of interviews ago in this series was talking to me about Jason Robards, and how Robards, is, for those who don't know, one of the great American actors of last century, especially on the stage, was really someone who was more understated, and he could pack more punch into sort of a droll little comment in one of those sort of bridging moments than a lot of people could do in the Stella moment of Streetcar.
Yeah, that's certainly true. The more quiet, the less you do, oftentimes, the more it is. I'm sure you've heard that less is more, and that's part of what it is. You don't have to act to show what's going on. Just be, and let the audience see that inner workings. So I would agree with that.
Now, you would, as an improv, as trained in improv, do you have any sympathy for, say, the method approach to acting, or is to you it's just like, okay, I'm on stage, boom, I turn on the switch and I'm this different character, or is it just whatever works? And do different modes of acting sometimes present different problems to different people who may be in other modes of acting?
I think it's up to each individual actor to find what works best for them. I think as an improviser and one who teaches improvisation, I think what we do is practice to enter the creative state, so that when you need to enter the creative state, you know what that feels like, and you can step right into that. So at a moment's notice, you can find yourself in that creative state. To me, that's why improvisation is so valuable and why the training is so valuable. Acting, to get good at it, you need to practice. It's like playing an instrument. The more you practice, the better you get. And with improvisation, part of the great thing about improvisation is the more you do it, the better you get. The more you fail, the better it is, because eventually you learn how not to fail. And I think part of the thing that's missing from improv training these days is the ability to fail at what it is that you're doing and not feel that if you fail, that you'll lose an opportunity. Failure is part of the process.
You've probably spent a good deal of your life, I would assume, on the road, not necessarily living in a stable home or whatnot. If you're taking theater jobs here and there, especially if you're doing improv theater and you're touring around the country, what sacrifices have you made in your personal life to enhance your artistic life? And I would assume that you retrospectively think that it's been worth it.
I think whatever I've done to try to balance personal and professional. And I think it's all been worth it. I think touring certainly has its downside, but it also has incredible benefits. Certainly a stable home life has its benefits as well. I don't know that one can speak for each individual, but I think the better you can balance both professional and personal things, the more success you'll have, the better off you'll be as an individual.
And how do you measure success as an artist? When is the most satisfying thing for you to come home after a performance and know the audience was rolling in the aisles with laughter? Or have you sometimes been more satisfied when the crowds maybe reacted only moderately, but damn, I never did that joke or I never did that role better than tonight?
They both have, they're both valid in terms of how one responds to things. Sometimes it's just great to know that people have responded to what you did really well, and it's also great when you walk off the stage and go, wow, I felt that was really incredible. It's all satisfying. All of that is sort of mixed in together with that in terms of what makes for a satisfying performance.
Well, before we move on to the roles that you've done in film and television, let me ask you about acting as a teacher. Is the didactic role as satisfying as being on stage? Do you get a more sort of vicarious thrill for now seeing your students or your pupils, however you refer to them, if let's say one of them got a role and you went to see the stage play and they really nail it or they get a great review or whatnot, is that as satisfying as your actual work on stage, say, is?
It's very satisfying. Part of the thing I like very much about teaching improvisation is to watch people discover what the value of improvisation offers and watch them understand and learn how to improvise. I find that very satisfying. And if that leads to specific success for the individual, that's very satisfying too, because they have embraced the concept of what improvisation is that way. So yeah, that's all very satisfying to me.
You spoke of failure a few minutes ago. Certainly, I would think that over the years, and I think that your studio has been going for over 2 decades, you've probably encountered people who just aren't ever going to make it in acting. They just either don't have the mnemonic skills to memorize something, they don't have the stage presence, they don't have the ability to sell a moment on stage. Have you ever had to deal with actors where after, I don't know, I guess semesters or whatever it is, after however many sessions or whatnot, that you said, Bob, I'd just be stealing money from you at this point. You should find something else. How do you deal with that aspect? And is that as difficult as dealing with, say, if you gave a rotten performance one night? It's personal failure versus that.
A couple of things. It's not up to me to tell people that they can't make it, because a lot of people who you think have no talent can make a career.
Yeah.
And to me, everyone has a creative element to them. At Actors Improv Studio, we do classes with people who are not in the industry, but who want to learn how to improvise so that they can feel more comfortable in front of people, maybe giving presentations at work, or maybe they're incredibly shy and have felt that improvisation may give them more confidence. And while these are people who would never perform, we work very hard to get them to embrace their creativity through improvisation. So if people are willing to learn to improvise, my feeling is we can help anybody and everybody learn to improvise, and not everyone will be necessarily a spectacular improviser, but they will understand the concept of improvisation, and it's up to them to apply what they have learned to whatever area they want to apply it to. When I was young taking classes, there were some pretty brutal teachers who would yell at people, "Get out of the business, you have no business being an actor." And that always bothered me quite a bit. And I don't see that as a right that a teacher, someone who's trying to help you learn your profession or how to act, I don't know that they have a right to do that. So I won't necessarily tell somebody you're not going to make it. If somebody asks me what I think about if they have a plan, I might guide them and say, well, I think you're learning how to improvise. Well, you may want to go off and get some other kind of training. But I don't see that as a role for a teacher, particularly an improvisation teacher, to impose that on anybody.
Let me end this first segment with a final question. We briefly touched upon the sexism and racism in certain roles as they're written on a stage. Let me just ask you about some of the barriers between genres within acting. It used to be, probably when you were first coming up, that television actors didn't do film, film didn't do television, Broadway actors didn't do either film or television. If you were on television, you were either a soap opera actor or you were on prime time. You were either a character actor or you're a star. Have those walls disappeared somewhat? Do you see that they maybe are still in place? And if so, what do you see for the future going forward in those media?
I think that'll continue. I think a lot of high-profile people now do a lot of television. With the explosion of different television channels and cable channels, a lot more content, a lot more creative and wonderful content is on television now that's as compelling as anything in film or certainly on stage. I think people have finally gotten to embrace the idea that it's all acting, and whether you're doing it on stage, in film, on television, or in front of the microphone, what matters is that it's all acting. And so I think that's exciting, and I think, again, the ability to create one's own content sort of breaks down all of those elements. I think there's a lot of cross-pollination happening in acting, and I think that's fantastic, and hopefully there's no reason why that shouldn't continue.
Well, we've talked in this segment about acting in general and more theoretically. In the next segment, I want to talk a little bit more about some of your roles in film and television, and we'll do that in a moment. Bill Applebaum is my guest. We've talked about the art of acting. In this segment, I want to talk a little bit more specifically about some of the roles that he's done, especially in film and television. And in looking on the IMDb list, at least, and I know that it's incomplete, and I know some actors I've discovered have had roles attributed to them that they never did, it says that your first role, at least listed, was on The Facts of Life, the old sort of cheesy sitcom from the 80s. Did you play the boyfriend of one of the girls, or were you a teacher?
I don't even remember. That was the first show that I did when I moved to Los Angeles, the first television job. It's a long time ago.
Okay. Then I see that you did, it looks like a television movie called Nothing in Common. Do you have any memories of that, or what that was about?
Yeah, Nothing in Common was a film. Gary Marshall directed that. Tom Hanks. It was Jackie Gleason's last movie. And Gary Marshall came to Second City. I believe it was in August. It's been 1985 or something. He was going to film. He was doing a film and came backstage and said, "I'm doing a film. I want you all to be in our film." And turned out 3 months later, he came back and put us all in his film. Filmed some of it in Chicago, filmed some of it out in Los Angeles. And that was, again, with Tom Hanks and Jackie Gleason. I can remember we were on set. I was out here in the, I believe it was an advertising scene where Jackie Gleason, who was playing Tom Hanks' father, we were waiting for him to come on to the set. And just waiting and waiting. And finally, he just walked onto the set. And we all kind of broke into spontaneous applause because it's the first time we'd all seen him on the set. And he was one of the people who we really looked up to when we were young. And he did his Jackie Gleason thing. That was very exciting and a lot of fun. And Tom would come and improvise with us at Second City when we were filming in Chicago. The great thing about working at Second City Theater in Chicago at the time was when films or shows would come through, people would come and improvise with us, and that was always fun. Great way to meet people. And then Gary turned it into a TV show on NBC, and I was a writer and actor on that show as well.
It looks like you had done mostly guest roles in television. Were you ever offered like a lead role in a show, like a pilot, and it just didn't pan out? Or?
Yeah, there were a number of pilots, always supporting characters in pilots, guest shots, not necessarily the lead, but a lot of pilots just never make it to air.
Yeah. I see that you did Fame, My Sister Sam. That's the one, that's the Pam Dorber show where the young woman was killed. And then I know Night Court, that was one of the things that I had seen you in. Have there been, because I know some sets are thought to be very welcoming, and other sets there's a lot of tension. Have you gone on sets where you were like, oh God, I just want to do my 3 lines and get off there? Have there been other sets that have been very accommodating? For example, I remember one of the people I interviewed talked about the Barney Miller set and just loving to work there, and he got to go back 3 or 4 times as a guest role. What is it like on set, and how does that affect the final product?
Well, there are certain sets, certain shows that they're sort of tense for whatever reason. Maybe the star is kind of self-centered. Maybe the producers are having a difficult time. You just want to do your job and get out of those sets. Yeah. Seinfeld had a great set. Larry David really worked hard at making it a very open, accommodating set. Did a couple of those, and of course I knew Julia, so that was fun to work those. But that was a fun set, and I think it reflected in the success of that show.
Now, I
think it helps to make a show successful if the set is collaborative, which is again what the essence of improvisation is: ensemble work in theater.
Now it looks like you worked with Gary Marshall again in Beaches in a small role. Did that?
Worked with Gary Marshall quite a bit in a lot of the films. He was a great guy. Gary was a real man of his word, and he liked to have people on set that made him laugh. Did a lot of writing for him in those early days on those films. He was a terrific mentor, wonderful man,
and he recently died.
Yes, he did. He just passed not a couple weeks ago now. It was a great loss. The number of people that Gary hired and worked with or gave jobs to or referred people to is just phenomenal. He touched hundreds of people's lives. And he was one of the truly good guys in Hollywood.
And Pretty Woman, you were in that. Was that a minor role? Because that's probably the biggest blockbuster, I think, that Gary Marshall
Yeah, that
directed.
was, Gary again would create these shows and he'd have you improvise scenes or do scenes because it made the set fun. And I have a lot of letters from Gary saying, sorry, we ended up cutting a lot of your stuff, but it was great working with you again. So that was fun. I think I worked about a week on that show, but you wouldn't know it given the final product. But to me, it's all about the experience anyway. That was a great experience.
Now, you mentioned Seinfeld, and then you also did the Larry Sanders Show and Married with Children in the late 80s, early 90s. Since you have a background in comedy, were any of those shows' humor more suited to your skills? Was Seinfeld better for you than Married with Children, or was Larry Sanders the best?
Larry Sanders. That was a great show, Larry Sanders. And Gary Shandling was really terrific. We improvised in the audition, which I think is why I got that job. It was very understated comedy based in the truth. Those were great shows. Gary Shandling was a perfect actor.
And I see you did an L.A. Law. Just my prior interview to you was with Michelle Green, who was on there. Did you play like a psycho killer, or what was your role?
No, boy. That's I don't remember.
Oh, okay.
I didn't play much in terms of psycho killers, though.
Okay.
A couple of stage productions I did in Chicago. At various festivals, I would play people who were unexpectedly dark, but I didn't play a psycho killer in L.A. Law. I just don't remember what I did.
I see you in the David Kelly episode of The Practice, and he was one of those people who did sort of dramedy. His shows were ostensibly dramatic, but they'd often have quirky characters. Were you in one of the sort of minor arcs playing a humorous character, or was it a more serious role there?
I hate to sound like a broken record, but I just don't recall at this time. I've done a lot of roles over the years, and certainly the ones from the 90s that kind of escape me sometimes. I'd have to look it up.
Okay. And then I see you also in a Brady Bunch sequel.
Yeah, the film. That was fun. Went to Hawaii to film that. That was fun.
Was that with the original cast, or was that when they were doing the mockumentary type?
Well, the original cast. I mean, Gary Cole played the head Brady guy.
And that was directed by the woman. I forget her name.
Yeah. I think that was that Rhonda Haines.
Let me see. Let me look it up here. I remember that. So these were the movies that sort of made fun of the old show.
Yeah, that's right.
Shelley Long.
The TV show and created that. Shelley Long was in that. She played
Arlene Sanford.
Oh, that's right, Arlene. That's right.
Yeah.
That was
fun. And then I see you did the Eddie Murphy movie, The Nutty Professor 2, and then it looks like you had done a number of TV dramas. It looks like in the last decade or so you haven't done as much television or film. Have you been concentrating more than on the Actors Improv Studio?
Yes, that's exactly right. In the last 10 years specifically, I've been, working hard on training people through improvisation, and I've done a lot more work with corporations and businesses, doing team building and using improvisation to help their either creative departments or not creative departments. That's been very interesting too.
So what do you?
Go ahead.
So what do you do then? Do they say, well, our team in Hong Kong has been really badly screwing up. We need you to go there to help build morale there, and they fly you to Hong Kong and you spend a week giving classes, or what?
Well, they generally don't come and say our team's been screwing up. They often say we want to do some team building to create a better sense of camaraderie or sense of what the team is. And so I'll go in and do workshops over the course of a couple days where we put them through improvisation paces and get everyone to sort of loosen up. And it's fun. It's fun to see people, again, who are outside the realm of the entertainment industry embrace and enjoy what improvisation can bring.
Is that something that you actually want to do, or did you sort of fall into it? Was it an outflow from the improv studio?
Yeah, it's something that was an outflow of that, and something that started that we would do when I was working at the Second City Theater in Chicago. We would create shows for various corporations and things. So it just was a natural progression from teaching actors and what we have been doing to getting into business and corporate world and doing improvisation with them.
Well, let's talk about why you started the improv studio. When did you start it? Did you found it alone? Did you found it with a partner? And what were the circumstances of its genesis?
Well, the circumstances about 20 years now, maybe a little more than that. Somebody asked me if I would run a workshop for improvisation, and I said, sure, I've been doing that anyway. And I started to think about that, and the more I thought about it, I thought, there's no real place to go for people to learn how to improvise. There's places to go where you can learn how to do characters and sketch writing, but there's no place where people have an opportunity to understand what the tools of improvisation do. And that was kind of the thing that jump-started Actors Improv Studio, which is an outlet for people to make the discovery of improvisation and how to be creative and not be clever. Excuse me.
You use clever as a pejorative. What you use it in a pejorative
because
sense?
I think that a lot of people think that what improvisation is about being clever. It's about being funny, and that's not what improvisation is to me anyway. It's not about trying to be funny. It's about being truthful, and out of the truthfulness comes humor.
Does cleverness lead to one-upsmanship?
I think so. I think it leads to one-upmanship. I think you're absolutely right about that. I don't think it leads to collaboration or ensemble work. I think that when you're trying to be clever, you're not trying to make the other person look good. So yeah, I agree with that statement.
So someone who maybe is Robin Williams clever, say, and someone who could just go off on a riff, may not be the ideal person to be in improv. So it's almost like, to use a sports metaphor, you don't necessarily need the big home run hitter batting cleanup. You're looking for the little guy who can get on base.
Yeah, I mean, Robin Williams, Jonathan Winters, these were incredibly creative people and very quick. And I still would define them as being creative and not clever, because they were just about trying to be as creative as they could within whatever it was that they were doing. And I think it's great to look at them as masters of creativity. But yeah, most people do not have to reach that level of creativeness to be good improvisers.
What role does ego play for acting in general and improv? And is it more of a hindrance sometimes if you have too egoistic an actor that needs the limelight on them? And how do you resolve that in workshop before that ego gets on stage in front of a live audience?
I think it makes it tough if people have big egos, because all you can do if you're working with somebody who has a big ego is support whatever they do. You certainly don't want to try to compete with them, because that that's a lose-lose situation, and there's no real point to that. In our in the Actors Improv Studio classes, we try to get everyone to understand it's not about what they're doing. There's no judgment going on. That the only people who judges an individual is themselves, which is the antithesis of what improvisation is. So we don't allow other people to critique the scenes that happen, other improvisers, other actors, because it doesn't matter really what choice you would make as an individual versus the choice that that person made on stage. What's important is the choice that that person made and whether or not that worked or not, and why, and how we can all learn from that. So if people have a really strong ego coming, there's nothing wrong with having a good sense of yourself, which is important, or getting a good sense of yourself, which improvisation can help people do. But ego is a different animal.
Well, what is the, I guess I'd say, what is the structure used to critique or to mold someone if you're not giving like A, B, C, or 85, 90 level grades? I mean, how do you, I mean, because clearly there's going to be some people who are more talented than other people. So how do you deal with the different levels of talent and ability and the different levels of those people willingness to work at it?
Well, one of the great things about Actors Improv Studio is working with each person on their own individual strengths and weaknesses. And we pride ourselves on that, being able to get everyone to be a better improviser. So there is not a cookie-cutter way for everyone to learn how to improvise. So it's all very focused on each individual. And everyone fails at some point, and everyone succeeds at some point. And hopefully what our focus is on, and I think what we pride ourselves in doing, is being able to get people to understand what makes for success and why something failed and how we learn from what that failure is.
And how is the studio funded? Is it funded simply by tuition? Do you get grants from state or federal budget? How does that work?
That's tuition based.
Okay. And where do you see the future of the improv studio, say in another 5, 10, or 20 years? What trends, if any, trends are there in contemporary acting or in contemporary improvisation that 20 years ago were maybe on the fringes that have come to the fore now, or maybe now are on the fringes that you see maybe opening up as opportunities in the future?
I think the difference between now and, say, 20 years ago is that more and more people are aware of improvisation and the benefits of improvising. And I just expect that to continue. And I expect that people will continue to embrace improvisation as a fundamental element of acting, and that improvisation will continue. People will continue to learn that it's not just about being funny, but it's an acting technique that keeps people in the moment of what's happening.
Are you the only teacher, or are there other people on staff, and what are their backgrounds, and what do they bring to improv that you alone may not be able to do?
Well, we have special people come in and do workshops, like Laura and Rick Hall, who do a musical improv workshop. Laura Hall, I know them both from Second City. Laura's the musical director for Whose Line Is It? And they do great workshops in terms of getting people to improvise musically, make a song. That's great. So that's something that I'm not an expert in. So we bring in other people. We bring in casting directors to give their perspective on improvisation and how it's applicable to casting. When we run young people workshop, I'll bring in other improvising teachers who specifically have trained to work with young people and how to improvise for them. So it cuts across quite a group.
Whose Line Is It is the show that I was thinking of when I mentioned Drew Carey
Yes,
early in the
yes.
interview. So let me just I guess wrap up. Where do you think in sort of, I guess, well, I wouldn't say the pantheon, but at what degree do you think improv uh, is applicable in most acting that your average viewer sees on? Because it seems to me that most people are not aware of it, and as we've discussed, there are misconceptions about it. Do you go to a movie and, let's say, if you see Matt Damon or some young star today, do you see elements of improvisation? Can you watch something on a screen and say, "Oh, that's clearly something that they must have"? Can you break something
Yeah,
a performance
there
down
are
like that?
times when you're watching film, or particularly in film, and one will get the sense, oh, that was improvised. That's really great because that's fresh and completely sort of outside the norm, or you can see the reaction that the other actors have, which was sort of a surprise. So it feels like those are improvised moments.
Yeah.
Of course, really great improvisation is when you don't know if it's improvised or scripted.
Yeah.
But I do see that quite a bit, and that's always fun.
Do we mentioned new media, the YouTubes and stuff, and certainly even just 5 or 6 years ago, Hulu and Netflix were not as big as they are now. De facto, they are almost like as powerful, if not more powerful, than the networks in some aspects. Do you think that newer media, whether it's on YouTube or certainly in 5 or 10 years, there's going to be something else that we have no clue about now that's going to come along? Do you think that they will be more open to improvisation, to more experimental acting and theater productions, perhaps on these webisodes or these web series? And what is your sense of acting in the future?
Well, I certainly hope that they'll be open to more improvisational elements and acting. Certainly, as more venues open up and they need content, they're going to have to find different ways of creating that. And I think with young people coming up and creating their own content, often that's improvised content. And so I think that that's just going to continue to expand. And I think that improvisation as an acting form will continue to expand and go beyond the whose line is it, or the kind of improv games that people play, to incorporate itself into continue to incorporate itself into more mainstream acting life.
Well, let's end this segment. In a final segment, I'll give you some closing remarks, talk about your own career and the future of the studio as well. And we'll do that when we return. I have been speaking with Bill Applebaum. ActorsImprovStudio.com is his website. I'll link to that, and also his IMDb and Wikipedia pages below this video if you've been interested in what he's done. We talked about your career in acting in general. As I mentioned, you have not done as much acting yourself. I've been focusing on your studio and teaching. Do you want to do more acting in the future as you get older, or is that something you look now as part of your past and you have taken on more of the professorial didactic role?
I'll still go and improvise with a group of Second City alum who are out here. We improvise at a place called the Fanatic Salon in Culver City that Jane Morris and Jeff Machowski run. And there are some improvising groups that perform there, and maybe once a month I think they improvise out there. So I still continue to do that. It's fun to do. At some point, I think it'd be nice to get on stage in a play again, not just improvising. But I really do enjoy seeing the growth of the students and the growth of the Actors Improv Studio as a venue to get people to appreciate and understand the terrific use of improvisation as an acting tool. So I find that very satisfying.
And have you ever thought of directing or writing for the stage?
I used to write for the stage. I've directed and I liked all of that. But at this point, it's not something that I have current interest in.
And then if you could have, say, one role to play on stage, let's say, what would it be? Your dream role?
Boy, that's a tough one. I don't have an answer for that, actually.
No. And let's just end by asking with in the next 20 or 25 years, assuming you're still around, will the where do you want the Actors Improv Studio to go to? And after your death, do you hope that it has as big a part as some of the other acting teachers and classes that are noted for their various method and other acting styles? Do you have a vision of the future for it?
I think it'd be terrific if after I'm gone, the studio maintains itself as a place, as a training ground for people who want to learn how to improvise, that keeps the focus on the individual, that keeps the classes a non-competitive environment, a place where people understand completely about what ensemble work is and what improvisation is, and that acting is not and certainly improvisation is not a blood sport, a competitive sport, but it's a great tool to help people access their creativity for whatever use they want. So it'd be wonderful if that maintains itself.
Well, actorsimprovstudio.com is the website. Bill Applebaum is the founder of that. He's also an actor. You can check out the links below this video for his work. I just want to thank you for spending some time to talk about the art and craft of acting.
It's been a pleasure, Dan. Thank you.